from long distances today. You'll be meeting some of them a little bit later, but I wanted to welcome Tony Coltman's aunt came all the way from Mexico City. Is that right? So bienvenido, San Antonio, Dios le bendiga. And we're going to meet a young lady that's a special guest that came all the way from Siberia, Russia. In a little bit, we'll meet her at the end of the service because I want Russell to come up and say something about her. But for all of the rest of you, some from the Valley, I saw Jose and Diana. Diana was here when we started Beth Simcha. Were you the first dance leader? Yes. I'm trying to remember, probably, yeah. Many, many moons ago, several decades ago, but welcome to you and Jose and your brother who's visiting. Others visitors, we're glad you're here. Well, Stan Meyer, I'm going to actually give a formal introduction because this will probably be on YouTube. And so people will know that Stan is on the missionary staff there in the Los Angeles branch, Southern California, of Jews for Jesus. He was born and raised in San Antone. Temple Bethel, I'm guessing. At age 9, his Messianic Jewish mother, Joyce, led him to personal faith in Messiah. And though both were Messianic Jews, Stan kept his faith secret throughout high school and into his college years. Later, he became involved in a thing called Campus Crusade for Messiah, Campus Crusade for Christ. And in his senior year at UT Austin, he became public in it about his faith and rededicated his life to Yeshua. He felt called to bring Messiah to his people, to our Jewish people. And Stan graduated in '85 with a Bachelor of Science. He was a physics major. He came on the missionary staff for Jews for Jesus that same year. 1990, he married Holly Colstein, a graduate of Moody Bible in Chicago. And the Meyers traveled a year and a half, that's a long time, with the singing group, instrumental group, Liberated Wailing Wall. Isn't that amazing? And he served as a missionary also in Fort Lauderdale and then Los Angeles. In 2005, this is an important part of Stan's story, he flew to a province in China where they adopted him and Holly, their daughter, Carrie Fu. And so another Meyer entered the household. And sadly, for all of us who knew and loved her and miss her, 2011, may her name be a blessing. Holly passed away after battling Lou Gehrig's disease. So Stan is a single dad that's raising his daughter in LA, and he holds a MA in Intercultural Studies from Fuller Seminary in Pasadena. We're praying, I think you're going to go on for your doctorate, the Lord willing. His organization is supporting him in that, and so should we. Yes. So you get to hear now directly as Stan is doing the main teaching. But please, if you're free, it rarely happens. We're going in to eat, or we're running and getting a sandwich and coming right back at 1 o'clock. And Stan in this room will be leading an hour-and-a-half workshop on how to witness to your Jewish friends. So Stan, front and center, and we can welcome you officially to South Texas.
Thanks. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I was really excited to see all the kids here. You know, there was not so many when I was here last, and it's just really exciting to see this this little bubble of kids, you know, coming through. It's in a lot of Messianic congregations. There's not that many kids. It doesn't draw kids into the Jewish worship and liturgy, but here they do, and it's exciting. The congregation that I attend with Carrie, the Dot Yeshua, out in Los Angeles, we also have this little, I say demographic bubble, this little bubble of kids. It's a bubble because it moves through, and as it moves this way, congregational leaders are looking and saying, okay, let's bring some more before we get a valley going the other direction. But it's exciting. Carrie is very bright. She's Chinese. She's from the province of Jiangxi province, which is kind of in central China. And she's not afraid to speak her mind, especially with me. I'm reading to her through the book of Luke, and we're going through the story of the Gospels, and I read the part where a Pharisee invites Yeshua over for dinner, for Shabbat dinner. He comes over and he's sitting there, and there's a scribe, which was the guys who used to transcribe. They didn't have photocopies back then, so they transcribed the Bible, so the scribe's there. And the Pharisee looks at him and he says, how come? Now, Carrie is very well-behaved. She's really disciplined. Holly really raised her to mind her manners, talk respectfully. So reading, and the Pharisee says to Yeshua, how come you didn't wash your hands before dinner? and Jesus answers, woe to you Pharisees who wash the outside and come out the inside. You are like painted tombs, white on the outside but dead on the inside. Woe to you Pharisees. And then the lawyer says, Yeshua, you insulted your host. And he says, and you, scribes and lawyers, woe to you. And I look over, and Carrie's silent, and her eyes are huge, and her mouth is open, and she says, Daddy, Jesus was rude. And I said, no, I gotta understand, you love the Pharisees. There were some who came to believe in Yeshua, and you're hardest on the ones you love and try to reach. No, Daddy, I would never say that. And I still have not answered that, by the way. So there we are. When we adopted Carrie, we went to a city called Nanchang, and I was with a group of 17 families, a number of them Jewish, and a number of them claiming to be Christian from Middle America. Now I think some of them were nominal Christians. And I remember when we went to adopt Carrie that, by the way, Edward, there's no slide for all of this, so just keep it right on there. They would take us around to see parts of China. And they said, we're going to take you now to a Buddhist temple. Okay, well, we're believers. I'll look at it from the outside, And the other group went in to see, and we got there, and they said, and now bring the little kids so that they can be blessed by the Buddhist priest and receive the Spirit. And so it was interesting to stand there and look at these families, including one that was Jewish, and two others that claimed to be Christian, going in and standing before this huge bronze statue of Buddha. It's as big as where the height of the ceiling, and kneel before the statue and have this priest beat these drums and bring these blessings and call upon the spirits to come down to these kids. And Holly and I were praying the whole time. As I looked at that picture and was appalled to see my Jewish brethren, this family, bowing before Buddha, Jewish people who never believe in Jesus, but it's okay to bow before Buddha. And these families who call themselves Christians, now mind you, there were some that did not go in there, and we were praying together by the incense altar. But I thought, how did Rabbi Shaul feel when he had to walk through the city of Athens and see these huge statues and witness these Romans and Greeks kneeling before statues of Athena and even Zeus, lighting their candles and carrying out their sacrifices? He was provoked in the spirit. And it made me think about how we, as those in the Messianic movement, need to relate to what is becoming a largely pagan, post-Christian culture and post-Christian society. I live in Los Angeles. I'm a little closer to it than maybe you guys in San Antonio, but the whole of our Western society is becoming very non-Christian, not just with people coming in and bringing different religions and philosophies, but also just the way our society and our American culture is moving. We need to say, how does the Bible advise us as Messianic Jews and Gentiles to relate to a largely non-Jewish pagan culture? And that's what the scripture gives us a picture of in this passage that we're going to read. Acts chapter 17, Rabbi Shaul in the city of Athens. I call this, relating or engaging a Gentile world as Messianics. So let's take a look at the scripture, Acts 17. I'm going to go ahead and read it, and we open with a word of prayer. God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, you created all cultures and set out the boundaries for peoples. And Lord, you of all people are the intercultural God who can give us wisdom how to introduce Yeshua to people of every language and culture, even here in San Antonio. And us coming from the original culture, the Messianic Jewish culture, give us wisdom, speak to us through your word in Yeshua's name. Amen. Yeah. Acts chapter 17. Now, while Rabbi Shaul, Paul, was waiting for them in Athens, his spirit was provoked within him as he saw that the city was full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogues with the Jews and the devout persons, and in the marketplace every day with those who happened to be there. Some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers conversed with him. Some said, "What does this babbler wish to say?" Others said, "He seems to be a preacher of foreign deities," because he was preaching this Yeshua and the resurrection. So they took him and brought him to the Areopagus, saying, "May we know what this new teaching is that you are presenting? For you bring some strange things to our ears. We wish to know, therefore, what these things mean." Now, all the Athenians and the foreigners who lived there would spend their time in nothing more except telling or hearing something new. Let me give you the backstory. So the backstory is that Rabbi Shaul was traveling through Europe, the Greek Macedonian colonies. He just came from Thessalonica and Berea, where he had been in the synagogue. There in the synagogue, he presented Yeshua. He'd go on Shabbat. They would find out he's from Israel. They'd say, "Oh, what news do you have to bring from Israel? What's the good news?" He says, "Good news. Have I got good news for you?" And so we went from synagogue to synagogue talking about Yeshua, the fulfillment of Messiah. And as he did that, some would believe and some didn't. There were some Jews who believed, and lo and behold, there were these Greeks who were coming to faith and believed. Some cities were more hostile, like Thessalonica, and some cities were more open, like Berea. He planted a congregation in Thessalonica. He got run out of both Thessalonica and Berea, and ended up in Athens. So here is Athens, this huge city that is like the New York of the Greek area. It's a huge, important, significant capital city. It had a long history. It had for a long time one of the first democracies there, and it was the height of philosophy. And he's there going through. Give you a little personal history. Paul's personal history. There we go. Paul's personal history. He grew up trained as a Pharisee. He was one of many sects in Israel at the time. The Pharisees were the ones trying to bring the priestly religion of Judaism to the people. It was the people's religion. He was very trained in the law. They had their own oral traditions, which evolved into today's rabbinic Judaism. And he lived and was schooled in Jerusalem, so he was culturally insular. This was not a guy who went to school in Athens. He had some reading, but he had grown up very insular in his Jewish community and very loyal to his Jewish identity. He never would have imagined he'd find himself walking by Greek idols and statues about years later. He had a love for Israel, and everywhere he went, he would go to the synagogue first, but God had a calling for him, and it was to the nations, the Gentiles. He preached to both Jews and Gentiles. How ironic that in his heart he had a love for the Jewish people, but for him, God had a specific calling to him. And that was his background. Now, he was culturally insular. God had to bring him out of that shell to be able to relate like he does in Acts chapter 17. Number 2, Paul was provoked. Paul was provoked. There we go. He was provoked as he walked past these temples in Athens. He couldn't in his heart feel comfortable looking at people bowing down to these statues and maybe even Jewish people in this city who maybe were drawn into some of this pagan religion. The Greeks had dozens and dozens of gods and stories to go with it. And we're living, as I kind of hinted earlier, in a post-Christian society. We're looking at a society that is much more tolerant now of non-biblical religions and cultures. Carrie and I, 2 weeks ago, were biking in Venice Beach on the bike route and saw this huge festival. They were singing songs, and it sounded like praise songs. I passed it, and it was a Hare Krishna festival. They're praying to Hare Krishna. I saw people from all over running in to see this. But not even here. In Israel, one of the biggest festivals in Israel is called the Creation Festival. Nothing to do with creation from the book of Genesis. It is a huge New Age festival. Israelis who don't want to believe in Islam, and they grew up and they have no love for Orthodox Judaism, which they view in Israel as the kind of oppressive right-wing fundamentalists for them, and they don't know much at all about Christianity. Where do young Israelis turn for religion? New Age, Buddhism, Eastern religion, even after they get out of the army, traveling to India and Thailand, looking for interesting spirituality. It's just prominent. Our culture is the post-Christian culture. And Paul was provoked by that. I think we as followers of the Messiah need to not be desensitized. We can't allow ourselves to be so comfortable as to say, this is okay for our kids. This is okay for us to feel all right about it. We can live in it, but we can't allow ourselves to be calloused and desensitized to it. And neither did Paul. Next, Paul's priority. In the midst of all of this, his priority first was to the Jew first. He went, even in Athens, to the synagogue first. That's where he went. Romans chapter 1, verse 16. The power of salvation for everyone who believes, to the Jew first. And in Thessalonica and in Berea and each city he went to, he would go to the synagogue first. And that's still the priority for the body of Messiah. You know, the church at large needs to make sure that we are bringing the Messiah to the Jewish people. That is still the priority. Let me unpack his procedure. So there he is in the city of Athens, goes to the synagogue, goes to the marketplace, and he's talking to people and he's introducing them to the Messiah. We read a little bit about what he was doing in Athens. So here are several things or procedures that Rabbi Shaul did. Number one, he was accessible. He was accessible. He went where the people were. He didn't open up an office and put out signs saying, "Come to my office." Okay? He went out into the marketplace. He went to where the people were. People could find him, both hostiles and people who were curious. Number two, he was visible. He went there and he was fully visible. People knew, even the philosophers from the Areopagus knew where to find him. So he was fully visible. He wasn't stealthy or covert. You know, I remember when Yeshua was brought before the Sanhedrin, when they brought him to try him before he was crucified, they were asking him, "What are you teaching?" And he said, "I was in the temple every day. How can you ask me what I was teaching?" There was nothing secret about Yeshua's teaching. And we're called to be visible, accessible. We're called to be very public. Yeshua was always public. Number three, Rabbi Shaul took initiative. He went to the marketplace looking for people to engage them, to tell them what he believed. He didn't wait for people. He didn't sit at a little booth, in the market, hoping that people would walk up and say, "Oh, look at you. There's something so spiritual and wonderful about you. Tell me what you believe." I'm glad you asked. Come back Tuesday.
Yeah, right.
He took initiative, and he stepped out of his comfort zone, and he initiated the conversations. I like to say he didn't stand at the end of the market as people finished shopping and got into their chariots and said, "Can I wipe your chariot car windshield for you?" And the people said, "Oh, what a servant. Oh, how wonderful. Why are you so loving?" I'm glad you asked. No, he took initiative to tell them. Next, he was articulate. Paul used words. There's a very common saying I keep hearing among believers. They quote St. Francis of Assisi, "Preach the gospel in all situations, but when necessary, use words." I'm sure he said that and had the best of intention, but it deters people from the basic instructions of the gospel. Proclamation. Proclamation is done with words, and that was what Yeshua commanded us to do. Both word and deed, yes, but don't neglect words. And next, it said he reasoned in the synagogue. He reasoned. Now, there's something that flies against our culture today. Our culture wants to say faith is not reasonable. Faith is a leap of faith. Doesn't our movies say that all the time? You watch a movie, believing it's just a leap of faith. There's even a Christian songwriter. I really like her music. Her name is Nicole Morgan, and she's got a song. I like the melody, but I just can't agree with her premise. The words of the song is, "What if it's true?" And there's a chorus. What if it's true? What if you jump and close your eyes, and the arms that catch you by surprise? You ever heard that song? What if it's true by Nicole Morgan? I thought, beautiful words. I love the song, but I cannot agree with that. Our faith is reasonable, and reason is not antithetical to our faith in Yeshua. Either it's true or it's not. Either it's reasonable or it's not reasonable. It's not just a blind leap of faith. We believe in a real Messiah that is described in the Hebrew Scriptures. And the Scriptures use reason to unpack revelation. So Paul reasoned. He didn't just stand up and say, "Well, it doesn't make any sense, just believe because I say so." And lastly, he engaged people. He took initiative. He was visible and articulate. He used reason, and he engaged people. He wasn't just like the gospel blimp, like the book was written, I think, 15, 20 years ago, the blimp that just passes over and has the gospel message. He engaged in dialogue with people. He sought to engage people in the marketplace, in the synagogue, and as we're going to see in a moment, in the Areopagus. So that was Paul's procedure. His place, there we go, Saul's place, he was in the city of Athens. Athens was a very advanced city for the Greco-Roman world, a city where great philosophers had come out of, very educated people, huge, tall marble buildings, the height of history in the Greek-Roman Empire. It says that he went into the marketplace and ran into the Stoics and Epicureans. By the way, Athens was named after the goddess Athena, who was the goddess of wisdom, because they considered themselves very wise and well-read. It was the city where Plato was from, who had been there years before and written a number of books, including The Republic, describing what a democracy should look like. The Stoics were a group of philosophers who believed that there was a separation between the world to come, between the spiritual and the physical. There was this separation between the two, and they lived for the spiritual, so to speak. There's nothing spiritual that has to do with the physical world. Very opposite Judaism, which would teach that we're all interconnected, that living every day is a spiritual exercise. The Epicureans, many people summarize them as, it's really reductionist to say, eat and drink because tomorrow we may die. Okay, the Epicureans. Those who looked at very existential, and now is when we live, and so both of them grabbed Paul. They used to have their debates in the Areopagus. The Areopagus was a big place of free speech. It's interesting to see places like that. I was in London years ago and saw Hyde Park. Hyde Park's very interesting. You set up a soapbox, and all of a sudden, boom, a crowd shows up. And everyone wants to hear what you have to say. Our London branch leader, Richard Harvey, used to set up a soapbox, and he would just give a dialogue, and people would just show up right there. Venice Beach is kind of like that. On the boardwalk of Venice Beach, although you never know what you're going to hear, but people would show up. And so that's what the Areopagus was like. People, it was free for them to talk. Anybody had the right to say their spiel without being arrested. And Mars Hill was kind of the place, the soapbox that you stood up on, named after Mars, the god of war. So he stands up and he gives a speech. And this is kind of the center of where I want to go here. Paul's speech. What did he say when he was given this opportunity to talk with people who had no inkling about the scriptures, had maybe never read the Septuagint, the Greek Bible? They didn't know hardly anything about what these Jews hundreds of miles away believed. And here he, as a Messianic Jew, had a chance to introduce the gospel to a non-Jewish pagan culture. What did he say? I want to look at the speech now. Acts chapter 17, verse 22. So Paul, standing in the midst of the Areopagus, said, "Men of Athens, I perceive that in every way you are very religious. For as I passed along and observed the objects of your worship, I found also an altar with this inscription: To an unknown God. What therefore you worship as unknown, this I proclaim to you. The God who made the world and everything in it, being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands, as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything. And he made it from one man, every nation of mankind, to live on the face of the earth, having determined allotted periods and boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God, and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet, he is actually not far from each one of us. For, in quote, in him we live and move and have our being, unquote. And even some of your own poets have said, quote, for we are indeed his offspring, unquote. Being then God's offspring, we ought not to think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image formed by the art and imagination of man. The times of ignorance God has overlooked, but now he's commanding all people everywhere to repent, because he has fixed a day on which he will judge the world in righteousness by a man whom he has appointed, and of this he has given assurance to all by raising him from the dead. All right, let me unpack that. I'm going to move that real quickly. But how did he communicate to a pagan, non-Jewish culture his message? Number one, he affirmed. Notice he affirms people. I find you very spiritual. He found a way to affirm them. And we, in our communication with people who are not believers, need to find a way to affirm. And that can be hard. I don't know how many of you, my wife Holly, she was Catholic. And she grew up Catholic, and she hated going into a Catholic church, like a mission, seeing those statues of Mary and people bowing down, lighting candles. Me, it was new to me. I loved going to the missions in Los Angeles, San Juan Capistrano. She didn't want to even go inside. How can you affirm that? And Paul, if nothing else, could say, well, you're very spiritual, aren't you? So at least he said that. As opposed to playing the Yeshua card and overturning the tables of the money changers. You know, he did that. But to tell you the truth, postmodernism, that's the era we're in, the post-Christian, the not modern, but postmodern, modern era, the era of the Enlightenment focused on rationalism and science and only what I can measure, see, and prove. But we're in this new era of postmodernity where people are looking for spirituality. They're looking to believe. We're not just a bag of chemicals and electric sparks. People know there's something after you die. There's so many documentaries like Discovery Channel and National Geographic and A&E on death and what happens afterwards. And the experiences of people, that people are looking for something. And we can affirm that. We can affirm in our post-modern Enlightenment era that it's good that people are looking for something more because there is. And they're realizing that the philosophies of the 18 and 1700s do not tell us why we're here on earth and what happens after we die. And that's something that we can affirm as believers in Yeshua. Number two, he connected. He found a way to connect with his audience. He found a point of connection. Now, as part of the Messianic movement, we can connect with Jewish people and talk about Messiah. We're waiting for the Messiah. We know who it is. Can you find a place to connect with those from non-Jewish, maybe non-Christian cultures? The story was told that a missionary to Irian Jaya, Don Richardson, went there and was trying to figure out how to communicate the gospel to this completely alien, non-Christian, non-Western culture, and discovered that when two tribes war, that to make peace, one would give his son to the other tribe membership, and they called that child the peace child. The warring tribe leader would give his son, his only son, to the other. And he went, aha! And he wrote a famous book called Peace Child, which talks about how he found a point of connection. We should find a point of connection. Number three, he informed his audience. He said, and now you have this God, the unknown God. That was the point of connection. Now, as Paul Harvey would say, now the rest of the story. What was the unknown God, by the way? Well, the Greeks they had this whole pantheon of gods, and they were superstitious, and they were worried that they would leave one out. There's a famous story, the Trojan War. How did the Trojan War get started? Because there was this contest on Mount Olympus between Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, and the prince Paris of Troy was supposed to decide who was the prettiest goddess of all, and then Aphrodite bribed him by telling him that he would win the hand of Helen of Troy, and so he did. He made Hera and Athena angry, is what ended up happening. So they're always afraid of angering the one god. You don't want to anger Neptune, Poseidon, because he would send a tidal wave over. So they just built an idol, saying, to the unknown God, and sacrifice to him, just in case we missed anybody. And Paul says to him, the one you don't know, I proclaim to you. He found a point of connection, and he informed them. We do that all the time in sharing the gospel with our Jewish people. We say the Messiah whom you're waiting for, I'm going to proclaim and fill you in with. Next, he was unashamed. Paul was unashamed. He was unashamed